Hi, my name is Eddie. I am 26 years old and I am an artist. Today I want to talk about creativity and academia. I've always been an artist. Very stereotypically, as soon as I could pick up a pencil, I was creating things. Like many other artists, I struggled immensely in school. Art class became a solace to get me through the day and push myself to at least pass my other classes so that I could continue to focus on my art. Thankfully, growing up in a town full of artists, I was given the opportunity to attend an arts high school that was local to me. It was a public magnet school and it functioned on a lottery audition basis, so I was extremely ecstatic to have submitted my little 8th grade portfolio to be accepted to the school. It took until I was about halfway through my freshman year to realize that something was wrong. For lack of a better explanation, I was being bullied by my art teacher. And I don't mean that she was just giving me criticism or anything, because I thrive on criticism, but she actually and genuinely treated me very, very poorly, to at levels of a joke. Why are you bullying a child? You know, you're a grown woman. And the jokes that she made at my expense began to reflect in my art, and I lost the drive for it really, really quickly. By the time that I had a different art teacher in my senior year, I had lost my desire to create, and even though that I had signed up for an AP art class to try and push myself a little farther, throughout the entire year I couldn't even figure out what my focus was going to be, let alone submit a portfolio at the end. I ended up in a psychiatric crisis and finishing out the last of my high school credits to get my diploma at a secondary program, and I never looked back at the idea of another art class again. For years after my high school graduation, I struggled to pick up a pencil. I stopped carrying a sketchbook. I put away all of my paint. I threw away and destroyed immense amounts of my art, which I do really regret. And I would have lapses where I'd be interested again, but nothing was satisfying to work with. And I hated absolutely anything that I even started to work on. This block became so intense that I started looking for inspiration like it was a powder that I had spilled on the floor, and imbibing in substance after substance to try and spark some sort of creativity was not working. Have you ever met anybody who can melt their brain and not at least be marginally creative with a marker? After deciding that it was a lost cause, I no longer referred to myself as an artist, but simply someone who used to do art. I tied my perceived lack of artistic ability directly to my negative experiences with academia. And for years, I spoke against the concept of art school, preaching to anyone that would hear it that academia absolutely killed creativity. Scholarship did not have any right crossing paths with art in my mind. My drive for art returned a few years ago, which is great. It was ebbing and flowing at first until it was a non-stop deluge of not just the desire to, but the need to create. I had absolutely lost myself in everything that I had defined myself as for the years that I straight up avoided my craft, and rediscovering the passion for art was a drug that I could not get enough of. Feeling stifled where we were living, my wife and I moved into a camper and started traveling. It was a little bit more expensive to do that than when we thought it was going to be, so we ended up spending some months in one place and then moving on and spending some months in another place. And it wasn't until we visited home again and took a trip back to my favorite art store, and my wife surprised me with a little shopping spree, that I became really serious about creating art again. I bought myself a new travel box, I bought paints, I bought brushes, papers, canvases, and I promised myself I would start creating new art. It became something that was, once again, all-consuming in my life. I started carrying a sketchbook again, I'd take trips to the beach just to paint, and I was bringing supplies on hikes to study wildlife. At the time of this heightened interest, I was living in a little campground in rural Florida and commuting to work in a city in an office as a social media manager on YouTube. I decided that if I was going to be spending so much time out of my little home, I was at least going to use the space that I was given, and I took an unoccupied desk and I set up an easel and laid a drop cloth, and I created like a little mini studio next to my desk in this office. So like anytime that I wasn't talking with a client or doing something important, or I had any downtime, anything like before or after work, I was just painting. And in this time, I began to study other artists. I had basic knowledge and concepts of movements and things like that because I'd passed a high school level art history course, but I was miserable during all of that, so I only retained like so much knowledge. I looked into different greats, and then I fell down more niche holes, and then eventually I stumbled across outsider art. These outsider artists are artists who, without any formal artistic training, have dedicated themselves to the act of creation. For these artists, there is a nonstop and inherent need to create art, and it doesn't matter what is the proper way to do something, what's popular in the current art scene, or whether or not the final product is necessarily profitable. Historically, these are all things that other traditional artists have had to worry about. Often these artists are from marginalized communities, and for one reason or another either don't have access to education in the same way or do not have the ability to sit in a classroom setting. Themes in all of their art vary incredibly depending on the personal experience of the artist, but you'll most likely see things that are depicting their personal visions, their struggles, the same sort of things in other arts, but from their own unique perspective. Art for them is at base a therapy. It's a way of expression and a natural instinct that drives the decisions that they make on a daily basis. I was immediately fascinated by what I had learned. These artists stood for everything that I have ever agreed with when it came to art. They did not need some self-important teacher berating them into being good at what they did. They didn't even care if they were good. They just were, and that was all that they needed to be. Having already had formal training, I was automatically denied entry to the club, but I have continued to surround myself with art from these sources, and I find that they are the truest embodiment of human creative nature. It is as much a need as sleeping or eating. The discovery and subsequent understanding of these artists catapulted my need to learn even farther. If these artists, deciding to only study what they wanted to and how they wanted to, were so fulfilled in their artistic journeys, why couldn't I be? I've always described myself as hungry for knowledge. Despite my struggles in the classroom, I find learning to be particularly fun and exciting. I studied what I could, piecing together strings of Google searches and binges on YouTube into my own personal notes in the back of my brain, and I was learning media I was unfamiliar with. I was studying artists that piqued my curiosity, and it was around here where I started toying with the idea of starting a podcast. When writing my first episode that has yet to come to fruition, I realized a few things. One was how much I enjoyed researching and learning about these things, and two was how far of a professional at art analysis I was, despite my experience being an artist. Within this episode of Art Driven Mania, I made a decision. It was sound enough. My spouse supported it, but I decided I was going to go to school. And that brings us here, which is surprising, I know. I'm currently finishing out my first semester of college after 8 years of being so aggressively anti-school. This whole video is actually the final assignment for my communications class. Hi, Professor. And I could have talked at length about my analysis of Hotline Miami or share my theories on lycanthropy in relation to human identity, but this particular subject has been weighing so heavily on my mind this entire semester. I love a good yap session, and so I wanted an excuse to share my philosophy. Creativity cannot be taught, but it can absolutely be destroyed. I'm not going to sit here and say that keeping a good attitude about things will keep you from dealing with people that absolutely do not want to see you succeed, but it is incredibly important to hold on to that part of you that desires to create. Losing sight of your own ideals in your own art is how you ruin the ability to access that part of yourself. It is incredibly hard to find inspiration, but it's really important to continue to foster a love for art. You should surround yourself with art that you enjoy regardless of anyone else's opinions on taste. There's no guaranteed formula to kick yourself out of an art block, but reminding yourself that you're still an artist and you're still surrounded by art does wonders to stoke the continual fire. Tangentially, what can be learned from art school is not the ability to create. New skills, perhaps, but just as we do not teach wolves to howl, there is a certain creativity that is personal and inherent to everyone, and I don't mean just visual art. Look at dancers, look at interior designers, look at literally everything in the world had to be created by someone, you know? Academia, when used in such restrictive ways, squashes the innate drive to create. Focusing on the end product and whether or not it is passable as academic art is a joke. Humans have been creating art before we conceptualized schooling, and we study this art in academic settings with incredibly high regard. Take the Lascaux caves in France for an example. These are examples of Neolithic art, created with soot and ochre. Humans realized that these materials left lasting smudges, and they decided to create. That was all that they needed. Incredible figures of animals dance along the walls of this cave, which was never even a home. This was just a space that people regularly returned to and continued to decorate. It is a space deliberately filled with art in a world before we had decided that art needed to even function in such a way. Art very quickly became standardized. Into Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, artists were just laborers tasked with the job to create. In ancient Greece, art evolved from just being a job to now becoming a passion, though it was one that was to be studied and produced in a particular way. Though the popularity of motifs, of subjects, and of the need to show your artistic prowess pigeonholed artists into very similar boxes, the knowledge that humanity gained in such a short time regarding art skyrocketed our ability to create and raised art education to a very particular tier. It seems that we are creatures of the extreme. Settling somewhere in the middle is an uncomfortable gray area for many people to be in, but I believe that this is where art and academia need to coalesce in order to thrive together. I have decided, after my years of scorning the idea of all artistic academia, that art education should exist. There are people, myself included, who love to learn. The ability to learn new techniques and skills and materials is an invaluable resource for artists who feel the need to explore, but I do not believe that any one person has the ability to decide whether or not someone else's art is viable. As taste is incredibly subjective, and none of us are deities with the ability to decide whether or not something is art, I find that grading an artist on style or ability outside of technical application is a selfish way to play God. Humans have always had the desire to create. It's been second nature to survival since the start of existence. It's really imperative that we as a species do not lose this drive as we evolve. Just pick up a brush and create. Focus on yourself and what you want to learn from others. Accept criticism and ignore slander. I know that's what I'm going to be